on ahead in, ladies. Looking good tonight, by the way. Welcome to Club Shasta.
Hi there, here's my ID.
Not seeing you on the list, ma'am.
What, really? No, I was invited. I was invited by the Lemurians.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. You're just not on the list.
I'm meeting a lady here tonight, all right? And man, she is a knockout. Tall, at least 9 feet tall. Maybe you've seen her. Elongated skull, big chestnut thing in the center of her forehead. Real knockout.
Yeah, she rings a bell. I definitely let her in, but I'm sorry, man. If you're not on the list, you're not getting in. That's just how it works.
Hey, mister!
Oh, hey, little Johnny. Go ahead in, bud.
All right!
Have a good time.
Wait a second, that kid's like 3 years old.
Well, he's on the list. It's okay, his grandma's DJ.
What?
Oh, here comes Biggie.
What, Biggie Smalls?
No, Bigfoot, my man. Get your hairy ass in here, buddy. How you been? I know you will, my man. I know you will. Go ahead in there, you smelly piece of shit.
Oh, come on. There's gotta be at least standing room or something.
Oh, make way, make way. Here comes the bachelorette party. The Atlantean bachelorette party is here.
Jesus! That's a whole flying saucer!
Oh yeah, they like to party.
Oh, come on, man. Is there anything you can do?
I'm sorry, man. You're not on the list.
Wow, Dylan, is that you? Grandma? Yes! What are you doing out here? Come on inside. The parties are blasting. We're having a Shasta shindig.
He's with you, ma'am?
That's right. That's my grandson. Come on, young man.
You're with her.
Yeah, that's Grandma. Her eyes look a little glazed over, but okay. You lead the way, Grandma. Yes, right this way. By the way, I'm gonna need you to shit on this paper.
Just another night at Club Shasta.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
And you have arrived at the summit, the very tippity top. You've been climbing for weeks and you got your oxygen tank strapped on, couple of Sherpas dragging your ass up to the top of Mount Creep Street.
It's hard to breathe up here.
It is. Woo! I'm getting lightheaded. Of course, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod, and of course, TikTok at Creep Street Podcast. And of course, if once a week is not enough for you folks, and let's face it, we all know it's not, come to the most exclusive club on the planet, and that is patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast. Now, I just want to dive into this because boy, oh boy, do we have something special today. This is like a
stew.
It's a stew. That's exactly what it is. It is a stew. It's a gumbo.
Supernatural stew.
It is. Folks, this episode is High Strangeness at Mount Shasta. And real quick, let me Sherpa you forward with my sources. Of course, we got Legends about Mount Shasta by Pastor David Lay, Strange and Mysterious Vanishings at Mount Shasta by Brent Swanser at Mysterious Universe. There's Something About Mount Shasta at Atlas Obscura, and a video, The Most Paranormal Place on Earth, What's Happening on Mount Shasta by the Y-Files on YouTube. Now, let's dive into this here. Mount Shasta is known as Yatako, or White Mountain, in the language of the Kuruk people. It's an ancient name for a land that has been inhabited for at least 10,000 years. At least there's signs going back 10,000 years that there was human life, and then substantial human activity starting about 5,000 years ago. You know, obviously long before European settlers arrived. before the gold rush, before maps and GPS and all that, this mountain was considered sacred, still is. The Yana, the Okwanuchu, the Modoc, the Akamawi, the Atsugawi, the Karak, the Klamath, the Wintu, and the Shasta tribes. And by the way, if I mispronounce anything, as always, not intentional. Now, all of these tribes actually lived within sight of Mount Shasta. And what's interesting is all of these tribes had their own different legends about the mountain. But one thing that was similar in all of the legends was that humans were not supposed to go above the tree line. That belonged to the gods or the sky people. And yet, even as the modern world has encroached, Mount Shasta, the mythos around it, has refused to be tamed. Over time, it became not just a place of spiritual reverence, but a beacon for the unexplained. A crossroads where history, legend, and mystery all collide. There's UFOs, ghostly phantoms, hidden subterranean cities, portals to other worlds, other dimensions. This mountain has got it all, folks. It's like a Costco of the paranormal. And as the years roll on, its reputation only grows stranger. Even its very name has been a mystery, and as we know, like we said, the various tribes all had their own name for the mountain. But in the 1820s, a fur trapper named Peter Skeen Ogden recorded names like Sastis, or Castis, or Sistis, or even Sasti, mistakenly linking them to the Shasta people, when in reality, and this is very interesting, the Shasta tribe never actually lived near the mountain itself. The Wilkes expedition from 1838 to 1842 further muddied these waters, confusing Mount Shasta with Mount McLaughlin in Oregon, also calling it Sastis. It wasn't until 1850, during the height of the California gold rush, that the name Shasta was officially cemented, but even then it was adapted to fit the Spanish naming conventions that were common in the region. But the mystery of Mount Shasta runs deep, far deeper than just its name, of course. Native American lore tells of two warring spirits, Lau, lord of the below world, and Skell, ruler of the above world. Both were hurling molten rock and flame at one another, shaping the very land itself. Sounds like they were being rowdy.
Yeah, sound like they like to party.
You boys calm down. Hey, knock it off. You're gonna make a mountain.
All hours of the night.
All hours of the night. They're bringing people over, partying on top of Shasta.
They're out of control.
You know what? I'm gonna call the cops.
It's time.
It's time. We've given them enough warning. But I'll tell you, Lau and Skell, those sons of bitches, those bastards, won't knock it off. It's a story that eerily echoes the cataclysmic eruption that actually formed Crater Lake in Oregon, just north of Mount Shasta. Now, true or not, the legends of Mount Shasta are here to stay, and those legends only grow stranger with time, as I said. Some believe that the mountain harbors the survivors of Lemuria, a lost civilization said to have sunk beneath the Pacific Ocean thousands, if not millions, of years ago. Others claim that after Atlantis fell, its refugees fled to Mount Shasta's caverns, where they still live today, hidden from the modern world. Some, anyway, because there's a lot of different places where they believe, Atlantis might have been and whatnot. But theosophists, which is a topic we will cover one day, as well as occultists and mystics, have all been drawn to the mountain, convinced that it conceals a vast underground network of ancient beings with knowledge far beyond human comprehension. Well, maybe it's just folklore, but then again, maybe it's not. Because people go missing here. And the deeper you dig, the stranger and more chilling it gets. One of the most infamous disappearances tied to Mount Shasta centers around a man named J.C. Brown, a retired mining engineer. In the 1930s, Brown stepped into the growing obsession with Mount Shasta's mysteries. This was a time when occultists and theosophists were already convinced that the mountain harbored, as we said, the Lemurians within its base. Now, according to Brown, he had first stumbled upon something extraordinary back in 1904 while conducting a geological survey for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company of London. According to Brown's claim, he had discovered a hidden tunnel leading deep beneath the mountain, an 11-mile-long passageway that opened into a vast underground city. Inside, he found something astonishing. Gold tablets covered in strange hieroglyphs, shields and artifacts of unknown origin, and most startling of all, mummified remains of towering humanoid beings, some stretching between 6 and 10 feet tall. He saw statues that seemed to glow in the dark, artifacts such as weapons, art made with gold, and in one chamber, he allegedly found 2 perfectly preserved figures, a man and a woman whom he dubbed King and Queen. Now, keep in mind, there is what is known as lava tubes, and to this day, Mount Shasta is actually a semi-active volcano. We'll talk about that later on, but lava tubes are essentially what they sound like. Think of it like a subway system of like tunnels that get hollowed out by lava, and then once the lava cools or goes away, you've got essentially a tunnel. And some of them are very big enough to walk through and stuff, so it's not improbable of someone finding a tunnel, like almost like a cave system, and walking around. So that idea is not like unfounded. It's a very real possibility that you could find tunnels and entrances into Mount Shasta. Now, this is what's interesting. This is where it gets interesting. This is so weird, folks. So Brown chose to keep this discovery a secret for nearly 30 years. Some say he feared his employer would, seize the site for profit or just think he was nuts and fire him. Others believe he spent the intervening decades researching lost civilizations, poring over ancient texts on Lemuria, and another fable or folklore tale about a missing civilization known as Mu, M-U, the fabled sunken continents. In fact, it was Brown's obsession with the book Lost Continent of Mu by James Churchward. This text is believed to have inspired him to come forward with his story. He thought perhaps Mu was somehow related to Lemuria, or maybe they were even one and the same. In 1899, an author named Frederick Spencer Oliver published a book called A Dweller on Two Planets. In this book, he tells of an ancient Hindu text that says that the Earth was once ruled by 2 great civilizations, the Atlanteans and the Lemurians. It's kind of like, in a weird way, it's kind of like Skell and the other guy that were throwing shit at each other, Yeah. It's kind of like that. But this was civilizations. You had the Lemurians and you had the Atlanteans duking it out for supremacy. Now, apparently they lived in peace for eons, and then the folks of Atlantis grew corrupt, grew envious, and a war started between the 2 civilizations, and they were very advanced, launching many nuclear missiles. They launched so many nukes at each other that, as the legend goes, the tectonic plates of the Earth became unstable, and an ensuing flood wiped them nearly all out. Another flood myth. If you look around the world in many cultures, a flood myth is almost a common denominator, which is interesting, whether it's the biblical flood or almost every culture, major religion has a flood story, which is so fascinating. And in fact, really where Atlantis became popular was Socrates. Socrates mentioned Atlantis. I think if I remember correctly, because we haven't covered Atlantis, and we're going to do it maybe this summer. I think that would be a good summer topic. It's one of those, it's just so big, but this idea that the world was devastated by a flood, it's a very common fable or myth or legend from all of these different cultures. The Atlanteans who survived were able to find solace in an underground city called Agartha, and it's said that the very few Lemurians who survived took shelter right there under Mount Shasta in a city called Telos. Now, when Brown finally came forward with his story 30 years later in 1934, of course it sparked a frenzy. And Brown, not wanting to let the folks down and, wanting to prove his claims, announced plans to lead an expedition to rediscover the lost city. And despite widespread skepticism, over 80 people, including scientists, treasure hunters, and wealthy investors, all signed up, some going as far as to quit their jobs or sell their homes in anticipation of the riches they believed that they would find. But the expedition never happened. On the day they were set to embark, J.C. Brown simply vanished. No trace of him was ever found. Some say he got cold feet, realizing that his elaborate tale was about to be exposed and went on the lam. Others believe he might have been silenced, kidnapped or even killed by maybe government forces or whatnot that wanted to keep this secret. And there are those who take his story at face value, and maybe he just went ahead on his own, found this lost city, and just never came back. Maybe the Lemurians themselves took him in. Either way, his disappearance only added another layer to Mount Shasta's ever-growing legend. And here's where things get even stranger. Some sources claim Brown was later found buried in Nevada in 1936. If that's true, then what happened in those 2 years between his disappearance and his supposed death? No one can say for sure. Whether he was a fraud or not, or just a man who got too close to something he was never meant to see, the mystery of J.C. Brown is one of Mount Shasta's most enduring legends. I mean, it is one of those, when you think about 30 years, it's like, it is interesting because it's like, why wait 30 years? But at the same time, if you were faking it, wouldn't you say, like, I just found this? I don't know. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, like, why 30 years? Why? And then,
it's hard to say because there's so many unknowns here, but one possibility, he kept his story quiet for so long out of fear of retaliation once he revealed it to people. I mean, you think about people who work in the military, and you think about stories of, like, they told me not to say anything to anybody about this discovery I made. And then they go on to obviously disclose it years and years later because they finally maybe feel safe enough to do so.
Exactly. Right. And maybe that's maybe he was seeing enough texts and enough writings from others that made him feel safe, like maybe it was an okay time to come forward with his story.
It's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Who's to say what would make someone stay quiet that long? I mean, you can also understand why it would be a lot for most people to wrap their head around. It's one thing to say, I saw a ghost or I saw a UFO, but it's one thing to say, I found a lost ancient city of godlike people that are, you're talking a totally different ballpark. I mean, let's face it, like, if you were to tell your boss, oh yeah, I believe in ghosts, like, they're not going to fight. You're not going to be like, no one's going to be like, oh, okay, even if they don't believe, or, oh, I once saw a strange light in the sky or something. But if you tell your boss, I traveled underground and I found an ancient civilization of folks that were 12 feet tall, and they, it's a lot more to chew on. But according to the legends, these white-robed sages, folks that he had found, they were refugees of this lost continent of Lemuria. The idea of Lemuria wasn't just a wild myth pulled from the air. It actually had roots in 19th century science. In 1864, British zoologist Philip Scalter first proposed the existence of a lost continent while studying the distribution of lemur fossils in Madagascar and India. He theorized that a massive land bridge, what he called Lemuria, had once connected the two regions before sinking beneath the sea. Of course, modern geology would later debunk this, proving that continental drift, not some lost landmass, was responsible for their separation. But by then, the idea of Lemuria had already kind of been hijacked by mystics and occultists and reshaped into this paradise of ancient wisdom and psychic abilities and cosmic enlightenment. And, obviously land bridges are very real things. That's how they say, like, the Native Americans got here was maybe through that, like a land bridge that connected. I can't remember my ancient history, but yeah, I mean, so obviously land bridges are a thing. It's just they were later able to prove that it was continental drift that separated them. But in the early 20th century, the legend took on a life of its own. A man named Wishar S. Sarave published Lemuria, the Lost Continent of the Pacific, in which he claimed that the Lemurians had not only survived the destruction of their homeland, but had flourished beneath the mountain. These weren't just ordinary folks. No, they were a race of supposedly advanced telepathic beings who had mastered solar energy and alchemy and the secrets of the universe. And they supposedly lived in what they called vast underground pleasure cities, illuminated by harnessed light from the sun and moon, using a single stone to power ships, tools, and even airships that could travel the world. Some even claimed that Lemurians had journeyed beyond their hidden kingdom, venturing to Africa to establish the roots of Egyptian civilization, or to the Yucatan to give rise to the Mayan. I mean, I do love this, whether it's true. I've always loved what they call alternate history or alternative archaeology, folks like Graham Hancock, stuff like that. It's fun, whether it's real or not. It is interesting to just seeing history turned on its end. It's like how Tarantino would reimagine events taking place.
It's just, it's an interesting idea of these people who lived underground and were highly advanced and possibly still exist. Either way, just the idea of them is fascinating.
Right. And as the years went by, alleged sightings of these enigmatic figures began to surface. Witnesses would describe them as tall, graceful, and otherworldly, dressed in flowing white robes with golden belts and sandals. Sounds like they were headed to a Burning Man, for God's sake. They had elongated skulls, piercing eyes, and most peculiar, a small walnut-sized protrusion from their foreheads, said to be an organ that enhanced their extrasensory perception. Some locals claim that the Lemurians still emerged from their subterranean city from time to time, occasionally appearing in nearby towns to purchase goods with gold nuggets before vanishing back into the wilderness. So almost like a knot, like a walnut-sized knot on their head that's like an extra organ in a way. Very interesting. And then these elongated skulls. Very interesting to think about.
Could these be aliens?
That's the other thing, too, is because there's also the idea that there's a theory that we were seeded by aliens, that they kind of I think it's the beginning of Prometheus or something. It's the myth of humankind being seeded by an alien race, and so that, there's that as well. And if that wasn't strange enough, there were others who insisted that the Lemurians weren't alone beneath Mount Shasta. And then there was the even stranger possibility, the idea that J.C. Brown never actually existed at all. That the entire saga had been nothing more than a fabricated story spun into reality by an eager press on a slow news day. A bit of regional folklore that had taken on a life of its own. If Brown was real, his decades-long silence about the cave's whereabouts is odd, as we said. But if he himself was complete fiction, that would mean an entire town, an entire expedition had been lured in by nothing more than smoke and shadow. Because we do know that there was an expedition and everything put together, so it seems almost impossible that he would have not existed. So it's kind of a stretch. It's possible maybe he didn't exist by that name. Maybe that's why he was able to kind of vanish, was maybe J.C. Brown wasn't his real name. Maybe it was almost like a pen name. And, back in the 30s, maybe it was a little harder to track someone down. I don't know, but it's very possible. The question remains, were these stories just fanciful embellishments passed down through the years, or is it possible that beneath Mount Shasta's craggy slopes that something truly extraordinary lies hidden from the modern world? Whatever the case may be, the mountain's legend only continues to grow as more and more people come forward with strange and unexplainable encounters. So, this is where the story goes from just like captivating and strange to this is like where the horror element comes in. Because J.C. Brown, if he existed and if he really did vanish, he was one of many, many, many people that have vanished at Mount Shasta. The mountain has a long track record of simply swallowing up those who go looking for answers, as if the mysteries it holds don't like to be disturbed. Maybe Brown did find something, maybe something found him. Part of what makes Mount Shasta's legacy so creepy is that it's a place where people really do vanish at alarming rates. It's a hungry mountain, baby, and it's swallowing up those who step a little too close. And those that come back sometimes don't come back the same, as we'll see. Take 1986, for example. That May, a drifter named Philip Verne Deshays was picked up by Eureka police and placed in a local mental health facility. Nothing unusual about that until he was released. He was last seen on June 2nd, and after that he was gone. Simply gone. No one saw him leave the establishment. No one knew where he went. The only trace left behind was his wallet, abandoned along a lonely trail on Mount Shasta. And that was it. No body, no signs of a struggle, and no explanations. And what makes his disappearance especially strange is how little information exists beyond that single eerie detail about his wallet left behind, as if it were just a breadcrumb and an otherwise empty trail. There were no reports of a man fitting his description showing up elsewhere, no rumors of him hitching a ride out of town, just silence. Some speculate that he may have succumbed to the elements, while others suspect something more insidious. That whatever force calls people to Mount Shasta had called him as well. And Deshays wouldn't be the last. He was just another name added to an unsettling pattern. Then, just a year later, another disappearance. On August 20th, 1987, 37-year-old Marie Louise Andrus left her home in Davis after an argument and drove off heading toward Mount Shasta. Now, maybe she needed to cool off, maybe she was looking for something. Either way, she never made it back. 2 weeks later, a fish and game officer found her car near Beaver Creek in the dense Klamath National Park. But Marie, nowhere to be found. And despite exhaustive search efforts, she simply was nowhere. No footprints, no clues, no body, just an empty vehicle on the edge of a vast wilderness, staring back at those who dared to ask where she went. Authorities would comb the surrounding forest, scouring the rugged landscape for any sign of her, but it was as if she had been plucked from existence. Even experienced trackers came up empty-handed. No broken branches, no discarded belongings, no indication of where she might have gone. Her case remains active to this day, officially labeled as, quote, suspicious circumstances. And what are those circumstances? Well, they point straight towards the shadows of the mountain. What's unsettling about cases like Marie's is how eerily they align with older indigenous legends. Stories of spirits and entities that dwell within the mountain, luring people in and ensuring they never leave. Was she just another victim of the untamed wild? Or was there something else out there? Why are some people called to Mount Shasta? And even more so, why do some never come back? Well, on February 15th, 1997, 27-year-old Karen Merrow left her home she shared with her parents and never came back. Her parents initially believed Karen had left on her own, especially since there was a warrant out for her arrest. But days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. By October 1997, 8 months later, Karen still had not returned. That was when she was finally reported missing, which is a little strange. How many months? 8 months later,
yeah, they really procrastinated.
Yeah, that's interesting because it makes you wonder, like, were the parents kind of pieces of shit? I don't know. It's interesting because
yeah, It almost seems like they had something to do with it, possibly, even.
Right. Well, as we know, it said there was a warrant out for Karen's arrest. It didn't get into the specifics why. I don't know. That's weird. It's like, why would you wait 8 months? Like, that's just goofy as hell. So Karen had undergone a liver transplant in 1994, but after her disappearance, she never refilled the prescriptions that she desperately needed. At the time, she had been dating a man named Ed Henline Jr., who was briefly considered a person of interest in her disappearance. However, there was no evidence that ever emerged against him. Then, in an eerie twist of fate or coincidence, just 4 months later, another disappearance occurred. Hannah Zaccaglini was just 15 years old, and she vanished into thin air on the evening of June 4th, 1997. She was last seen walking home from a nearby friend's house. Her case raised suspicions, leading some investigators to believe that the two disappearances may have been somehow connected. You would have to think if she was walking home from a friend's house, 1, it can't be that far of a walk, and 2, it's probably a walk that she's made many times. They pulled out all the stops, they brought in helicopters, search parties, tracking dogs, yet nothing was ever found. And then there was the man investigators couldn't ignore, a James or Jim DeVera. He was the last person known to have seen Hannah that night. A friend of the family, someone that they trusted. He became a person of interest almost immediately, but without a body and without evidence, it was all just speculation. Years passed, and still, the case refused to break. Then, in 2012, 15 years after Hannah had vanished, DeVera was arrested on unrelated charges, but rumors swirled that he had confessed, perhaps. Had something finally come to light? Authorities remain tight-lipped, and Hannah's case remains officially unsolved. Both vanishings hang in the air, unresolved, Karen's and Hannah's, adding to the growing list of mysterious disappearances around Mount Shasta. At first, investigators struggled to link the two cases. I mean, after all, Karen was an adult woman with a complicated history, and Hannah was just a teenage girl with no reason to disappear, no enemies or anything like that. The proximity, the lack of any trace left behind, though, and the timing, it was all too strange, and authorities began to wonder, were these disappearances random, or was there something more sinister at play? Some locals told stories about the mountain's curse, about how those who vanished near Mount Shasta were never truly missing, they were just taken. Others pointed to more earthly threats, a predator maybe lurking in the area, a human or creature who knew the land well, and well enough to make a person disappear without a trace. The terrain was also unforgiving and the wilderness vast and indifferent. If someone wanted to vanish or wanted someone else to vanish, Mount Shasta was the perfect place. To this day, neither Karen nor Hannah have ever been found. No remains, no belongings, and still no answers. Just two names added to Mount Shasta's long list of mysteries. Two folks who stepped into the mountain's shadow and never stepped back out. The next strange appearance involves a man named Carl Herbert Landers, a 69-year-old man from Orinda, California. On May 25th, 1999, Landers set out to climb to the summit of Mount Shasta, accompanied by two friends, Milton Gaines, age 64, and Barry Gilmore, age 60. You got to give it up for these geezers climbing this mountain.
Yeah, impressive.
Very impressive. At 9 a.m., Landers decided to get a head start and left camp ahead of his two climbing partners. But after that, he vanished without a trace. Despite being an experienced outdoorsman and an excellent physical condition for his age, Landers was never heard from again. This is what I want to know, is if you're climbing with friends, why not just wait for them to go with you?
Yeah.
That was the one thing I thought when I read that. I was like, unless that's like a thing in climbing, you know what I mean? But it's
Maybe,
like...
yeah. Seems like an unnecessary risk, though.
Yeah, especially at their age. It's like, just wait till the other guys are... It just seems so strange. But anyway, extensive search efforts did follow. The lake, the forest, and the surrounding area were thoroughly searched using grid patterns, and human scent dogs were brought in as well. But despite all these efforts, there was no sign of Landers. Once again, as with all the other cases, no body, no gear, no trace. It was as if he simply disappeared into thin air. And then there were the stranger stories. Some believed that Landers had stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see, something that lurks beneath the surface of Mount Shasta. Perhaps a hidden entrance to an underground world, a portal to another realm, or even meeting with the mysterious beings that legends say reside in the mountain. And then there was that detail about those who knew him best. Landers had been taking a medication for altitude sickness. His friends swore he had been feeling fine, but what if something had gone wrong? What if he had suffered a sudden disorientation, a hallucinatory episode that maybe led him to walk off the trail further and further into the unknown? But whatever the explanation, Carl Landers just became another name on the list of Mount Shasta's victims. Now, in the summer of 2000, a woman named Rosemary Kunst, 70 years old, embarked on a journey to the Marble Mountains wilderness with a Native American spiritualist group. This backpacking trip was her attempt to heal from the grief of losing her husband in a car accident. On August 17th, Rosemary and a group of 20 others hiked 12 miles to a small, oval-shaped mountain lake in the area known as Woolly Creek. Upon reaching the lake, they participated in a seance, hoping to contact the ancient spirits of the land. The following morning, everyone set out for a day hike, but Rosemary declined to join them. Instead, she told the camp's cook she planned to take a short walk and hoped to, quote, mingle with the spirit of her deceased husband. However, Rosemary never returned. When the rest of the group returned from their hike, they fanned out to search for her, calling her name into the still wilderness, but she was never found. A massive search team was deployed to scour the area, and with the help of FLIR-equipped helicopters and sniffer dogs and horseback searchers and even the California Highway Patrol, yet despite the extensive efforts, no trace of Rosemary was ever found. The only clue, a few strands of her hair caught in the brush far from the trail. The direction Rosemary had walked was considered virtually impossible off-trail, and the only other exit would have been back through to her camp, where she would have undoubtedly been seen. And this added a layer of confusion to the case. How could she simply vanish without a trace? And adding to the strangeness was that the tracker dogs were unable to even find her scent. Despite the enclosed location, the lack of wind, rain at the time, and they even had hair, it was as if she literally evaporated in the air, her scent as well. No further trace of Rosemary has ever been discovered, and her disappearance remains one of the most perplexing mysteries surrounding the mountain. The forest seemed to have simply swallowed her up, and no amount of searching was going to bring her back. It's as if the earth closed in around her, taking every clue, every footprint, and every sign that she ever existed. And let's hope that wherever she is, she's with her husband.
It's interesting how little trace of people is left after each of these instances.
Yes.
There's always just the tiniest bit of evidence, but that's it.
Not even a body. Yeah, it's very, very strange. Well, it keeps going because 10 days before Christmas of 2002, 34-year-old Angie Fulmer of the Mount Shasta area took a drive around Lake Siskiyou with her boyfriend, Thomas O'Connell. At some point, the two had an argument, and Angie got out of his truck in frustration and walked off into the forest towards South Fork Road, near an old logging road in the Twin Pines area. Hours passed. When she didn't return, O'Connell reported her missing 8 hours later, and a search was launched, and of course it turned up nothing. At first, it was assumed that Angie had maybe run away. She had been struggling with her relationship and alcohol abuse issues, and then came a chilling detail. Shortly before her disappearance, Angie had reportedly asked her mother to care for their children if anything ever happened to her. There was also the unsettling possibility that she had been abducted. O'Connell, while cleaning out his pickup as he waited for Angie, reported hearing a car door slammed, followed by the sound of an engine fading away. Now, at the time, he assumed that Angie had just gotten a ride from someone else, but as the days went on, that assumption grew more ominous. Over the years, there have been various leads and tips regarding Angie's disappearance, along with alleged sightings, but each one just fizzles out, leading nowhere. In 2003, there was a potentially promising break in the case. A man walking his dog stumbled upon human female bone fragments near where Angie was last seen. At first, authorities believed that they had finally found the missing woman, but after tests, it was determined that the remains did not belong to Angie. Despite sporadic clues and attempts to connect the dots, the case went cold, and no further sign of Angie Fulmer has ever been found. So it's interesting that they still found a bone, and it's like, well, whose was it then? You know what I mean? Like, this is interesting. Also, the boyfriend, this seems a little more suspicious. Like, she had told her mother, take care of our baby. She has an argument with her boyfriend and vanishes. Not saying he did anything, but this one seems a little more maybe human-driven than supernatural. But I could be wrong.
That is a very interesting element that she said to take care of the kids if anything happened to her. That's the kind of thing only somebody says if they are expecting something.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, that's, of all these, that one's pretty strange and pretty fishy in terms of the human element of it. But the disappearances just keep on coming. The disappearance of Grace Sabbats is another eerie tale woven into the landscape of Shasta's strange history. By all accounts, she was happy, healthy, and in good spirits when she set out for a solo camping trip near the Klamath River in March of 2014. There was no warning signs, no ominous premonitions, just a woman enjoying the wilderness and embracing the solitude of nature. But then, of course, without a trace, she was gone. The last confirmed sighting of Grace came from a sheriff's deputy on March 1st. He had spoken with her at a campsite and everything seemed normal. No distress, no signs of trouble. But after that, nothing. The following day, her car was discovered near the Skiahan River Bar access area. Nearby, investigators found a set of footprints leading down to the river, but no footprints led back out, which was pretty strange. The river was searched and dragged meticulously, but nothing was found. No body, no belongings, no sign of a struggle, just nothing. No suspects, no clear leads, just another case of someone who walked into the woods of Mount Shasta and never came back. Now, the other thing is if she had had a car accident or something, there would be a body, right? Or there would be traces of something. While Grace's case seems like it could be explained by a tragic accident, it's the eerie details that make it linger. Details that mirror the strange disappearances that have plagued the Shasta region for decades. A solitary set of footprints leading to the water, but none leading away. A campsite left undisturbed. A woman who, by all accounts, had no reason to vanish. And then there's the pattern. The disappearances here don't just follow the usual script of lost hikers or tragic missteps. Too often, there's an element of the unexplainable. People disappearing from well-traveled areas. Experienced hikers just vanishing without a trace. Search teams coming up with absolutely nothing. And Shasta is filled with stories of people like this who have just vanished into the unknown. Even more recently, in May of 2020, 28-year-old Devontae Morgan was staying at Cold Creek Inn with his girlfriend in the town of Mount Shasta, which is nestled right at the base of the mountain. On May 7th, Morgan was reported missing by his girlfriend, who claimed that they had had an argument on May 4th, but had still spent the night together at the inn. The next morning, Morgan had left for a walk and his girlfriend went out to see the sunrise. She later reported passing him on the street, but he ignored her, offering no response. And this would be the last time she saw him. So once again, a lot of people getting into arguments and then vanishing too, which is interesting. The final confirmed sighting of Devante was captured on surveillance video showing him walking alone along North Mount Shasta Boulevard on the morning of May 5th, 2020. And after that, he just vanished. A grid search was conducted covering areas within a mile of where Morgan was last seen. Cadaver dogs were used and teams scoured the woods and the marshland, and no trace of him was ever found. No scent, no clue. And what was weird was the last time he was seen was in the heart of town, a place where there's security cameras and people around, and yet no one saw where he went. So very, very interesting there. Now, these next few get very weird. The disappearance of Rocky Ramirez is one of the most recent and unnerving cases tied to Shasta. He was a 47-year-old musician and former firefighter. Ramirez set out on the morning of August 10th, 2021, leaving Humboldt County, California for what should have been a simple drive to Eureka. A trip that he had made before, and a trip he should have completed in just a few hours. But Rocky never arrived. The last known contact with him came around 12:30 p.m. in the Hoopa area, where he reportedly checked in with someone. After that, nothing. A vanishing act. And when authorities launched a search, they found something deeply unsettling. They found his car crashed 300 feet down an embankment near the Tybar River, not far from a place ominously called Happy Camp. But Rocky himself was nowhere to be found. And here's where it gets truly bizarre. This crash was bad, but not impossible to survive, but yet there was no sign of someone crawling from the wreckage, no footprints, no blood, no indication that Ramirez had attempted to leave the scene. It was as if he had been plucked straight from reality and the car just kept going and off a cliff. Authorities combed the area, of course, searching the forests and rugged cliffs and riverbanks, but nothing. No evidence of a struggle, no belongings, nothing. Tybar River area has long been known also for these strange vanishings, eerie lights, and it also has an unsettling reputation for things lurking in the trees by the river, a place where others have disappeared under circumstances just as perplexing. But here is a strange tale. That same year, another Los Angeles man was hiking with friends on the mountain. No strange voices, no ghostly songs, just a group of hikers enjoying the wild beauty of Shasta. And then without warning, he stops, takes off his shoes, and without saying a word, started walking up the mountain alone. His friends shouted for him, tried to get him to turn back, but it was like he was in a trance, drawn by some unseen force. The higher he climbed, the further he drifted away from reason. Then the storm rolled in. By the time searchers found him the next day, it was too late. His body was discovered at 9,600 feet, high up in the brutal terrain, where he should have never been able to have made it in the first place. Once again, no sign of a struggle, no clear cause, just another lost soul claimed by the mountain. And what's interesting about this is people actively watched him disappear. He stopped, took off his shoes, and walked up the mountain. That's weird. That's extremely weird.
It's similar to that guy we talked about earlier who left his friends and went on ahead.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's weird to happen at all, but especially multiple instances where people just go off on their own on this thing.
Right. Well, some vanishings leave behind nothing but questions. And then there are other stories, like the case of a John Doe on October 1st, 2010. It's a story that just defies reality itself. It was a 3-year-old boy who disappeared near a popular fly fishing river close to Mount Shasta. One moment he was there playing, laughing. The next he was simply gone. His family's desperate calls echoed through the trees, but there was no response. Authorities launched a massive search. They scoured the area for hours, and then 5 hours later, they found him. He was sitting in a stand of trees, silent, motionless. He wasn't crying. He wasn't scared. He wasn't even relieved to see his rescuers. He just sat there staring as if he had been waiting for them. At first, everyone thought it was just another case of a lost kid who had wandered off too far, but then he started talking. And what he said was something no one was prepared for. According to this young boy, he hadn't just wandered off or gotten lost. No, he had been taken. But not by a stranger. Not by an animal or even a Bigfoot, but by his own grandmother. Or at least something that looked like his grandmother. The way he told it, this grandmother had led him into a dark cave deep within the mountain, but the deeper they went, the more things stopped making sense. The room they arrived in was cold, silent, and littered with human-shaped figures standing or sitting motionless in the dark, not breathing, not blinking. The boy realized that they didn't seem to be people at all, but like machines, like human-looking robots just sitting there lifeless, some leaning against the walls, frozen in eerie, unnatural positions. And that's when he noticed it. His grandmother, the person he had followed so willingly, was now glowing. A strange light radiated from the top of her head. And suddenly, this young boy realized the truth, and it hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't Grandma. This was something else. Then came the commands, and this is fucking weird. She told him to defecate on a piece of paper. When he refused, she got angry. Then, as if things weren't weird enough, she told him something that freaked him out. He wasn't human. That he was from outer space. That he had been planted in his mother's womb. At some point, this grandmother relented and took him back outside without getting the paper she wanted. She told him to wait in the bushes, and that's where the searchers found him. Alone, silent, blank eyes, and then with a story that was beyond explanation. Now, when the boy's story hit the light of day, it sent shockwaves through the family, of course, but this is weird. His real grandmother spoke up, and she revealed something very interesting. And it's something that takes the story to a whole new level. She said that a year before that incident, she had been camping in the same area. One night, while she was asleep in her tent, something happened. Something she couldn't explain. She was woken up by a sound. She wasn't startled. It wasn't like a nightmare. It wasn't something that jolted her awake. It was just a sound that kind of gradually brought her awake. And she realized that she was just somewhere else. When she came to, she found herself outside of her tent. Not far, but definitely not where she had gone to sleep. And then the pain set in. At the base of her neck, she felt a deep, aching soreness. When she reached up to touch it, she felt something strange. 2 puncture marks. The skin around them was red and inflamed, but there was no explanation. No memory of what had happened, just a deep, unsettling feeling that something was wrong. She had no idea if her experience had anything to do with her grandson's story a year later, but she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe it did. To this day, neither the child or the grandmother have changed their story. And veteran investigator David Paulides, whose career is filled with studying the most mind-bending vanishings, he considers this one of the strangest. A child abducted by perhaps a machine in disguise or some sort of cloned figure. A glowing imposter in a cave full of human-like automatons. Almost like a missing time event. Could it all just be a disturbing coincidence, or did the family stumble upon something? Because it almost sounds like what it seems to imply is that it's almost like they were I didn't see it so much as robots as they were like collecting DNA. Maybe robots was just how the boy explained it because everyone's like in a still...
And maybe he perceived them as robots because they were just slightly uncanny.
Right. And he's a 3-year-old boy. He probably doesn't have language, doesn't have the right words to explain that. So he just says robot, like everyone acted like a robot. You're absolutely right. So for every hiker that walks out into the woods and never comes back, those that do often come back different. Stories of lost time, eerie voices, inhuman figures lurking in the shadows. Mount Shasta is beautiful. It's breathtaking. It's a place of history, legend, and spiritual wonder. But it's also a place where people simply vanish, where the line between reality and something else gets blurred. And travelers step into the trees and are never seen again. What could be happening out there? And what mystical forces are at play? What rift between worlds? Or is something even more terrifying hiding out in those mountains? Something that feeds on the lost? Whatever the answer is, one thing is clear. Mount Shasta's mystery isn't fading away anytime soon. Now, here's some other just facts to know about Mount Shasta. This I thought was interesting. It's one of the largest peaks in the United States, yet there aren't really any other mountains around it. So it sticks out like a huge thing. Just, you can see it from almost anywhere. Like I said, Mount Shasta is a semi-active volcano. Its last full eruption was a long time ago, back in 1250, but as recently as just a few years ago, Shasta was oozing enough lava that it actually started some forest fires. A place called Petroglyph Point is not far from Shasta and contains some of the oldest stone writings ever found in North America. These go back, of course, thousands of years. Now, these glyphs depict the usual things, the sun, the stars, moon, rivers, trees, etc. But there's also depictions of what many archaeologists believe were supposed to symbolize these sky people, these beings who lived in this alternate reality above the tree line. The Modoc tribe had a legend about beings known as the Matacogmi. These folks were said to be the, quote, keepers of the woods. Now, what's interesting is that the Matacogmi is the Modoc word for Bigfoot and is similar to a Tibetan word, Metogami, which is their word for Yeti. Since the 1920s, folks have claimed to see these large, giant beings around the mountain. In 1976, a camper returned to his campsite one night and saw a large figure near his campsite. And at first he thought maybe it was like a forest ranger just checking on him. But as he got closer, he said what it really was a big old Bigfoot. In fact, in 1962, a hiker even claimed to have seen a female Bigfoot giving birth. Whoa.
Wow, what a sight that must have been.
Oh my God, I wouldn't have wanted to walk in on that. Like, that would have been...
Yeah, I know nature's supposed to be beautiful, but...
Hey, beauty can be subjective, let's just say that.
Beauty is in the eye of the Bigfoot beholder.
There you go. In 1930, an 8-foot-tall, human-like skeleton was actually found. This was covered by reputable news outlets of the day in the area. According to many Native American legends, these giant beings roamed the land for thousands of years, but were wiped out by, of course, a great flood. But maybe these things aren't Bigfoot, as there are many legends that describe these strange beings as being something else entirely. For the last 100 years, there have been many UFO sightings at Mount Shasta, and they've actually increased in the last few years. In fact, of the 100 most active UFO areas in the world, Mount Shasta ranks at number 13, so it's up there. In 2008, locals reported what looked like a giant glowing jellyfish suspended over the mountain. And that is, if you've listened to Creep Street for a while, you'll know jellyfish UFOs are a type of UFO that is somewhat common. Of course, you have saucers, you have the cigar-shaped UFO, you have spherical UFOs, you have egg-shaped UFOs, but people have also mentioned these sort of jellyfish-like UFOs. Think of like almost like the thing in Nope, by
Yeah. Jordan Peele.
Yes, Jordan Peele, yes. Now, that is, without spoiling anything, that is something a little different, but like the idea of this sort of jellyfish UFO, we've actually, I think, done an episode on it, or at least we did for the Patreon. Jellyfish UFOs, very fascinating phenomenon. And this jellyfish was just suspended over the mountain, glowing with light, yet was completely silent, yet seemed to have like a fire almost billowing within it. And here's what's interesting. People have claimed to have seen UFOs fly into the mountain itself, and not like a door opened and they flew in, but literally like they fly into the side of the mountain and vanish, almost like there's a cloaking device or some sort of an interdimensional rift. That maybe that, this is an area where people can enter, beings can enter in and out, or these craft can enter in and out. Maybe it's just a cloaking device and they go into the bowels of Mount Shasta and park their vehicle. Or maybe it is like a little window into another dimension. They travel in and out that way. But literally, Shasta, as you can imagine, it's got a little of everything. Gage, of all the stories we've discussed, which one sticks out to you the most?
The one that probably sticks out to me the most is the kid seeing his grandmother, because that one just is so astonishing, really. And eerie, especially with the grandma having that experience a year earlier. And what really struck me is how little trace there are of these people after they're gone. It seems to be common among all of these.
Yes.
In a lot of true crime cases, when somebody goes missing in the woods, there's usually always more evidence left behind. What we got here is like, a few hairs? Somebody's wallet, which isn't even, part of their body. Like, there's just so little.
And notice like a couple of cars that were found, like that one in particular, the guy where it says it like went down a 300-foot ravine.
Oh, yeah.
That almost makes me wonder if he was not even in it. If let's say foul play for whatever reason. I'm not saying it was. But maybe, whoever's already dead, and then you push the car down into a ravine or something.
Right.
I don't know, because like they said, there was no blood, there was no sign. It wasn't impossible that he would live, but there was also no sign that he had crawled out or...
But even if he didn't live, you'd think he'd be severely injured and leave behind some blood.
Yes, and wouldn't get far. And I don't know specific, people who are more outdoorsy might be able to tell, I don't know, maybe human remains are quickly between just animals in the wild and nature. Maybe the human body can.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. I'm not up to snuff on that. So who knows? At the end of the day, what's important to remember is these were real people, whether it was foul play, whether it was supernatural, or whether it was just a tragic accident. It's important to remember that these were real people who vanished. And obviously, we don't want to just make light. These are more than just simple campfire tales. These are, real people that died, or at least as far as we know, went missing. But Mount Shasta, it's just the gift that keeps on giving. But I'll tell you what, Gage, I got a list of names that I hope never ends up on the Shasta list.
Oh yeah? Who's that?
That's the names of our top tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh-So-Suave Sean Richardson, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Vieren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, the Hellacious Cale Hoffman, and Pugblorb, the Poltergeist. Oh, yes, folks. Thank you. If you want to join that illustrious group, just head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. Gage, thank you as always for making these episodes sound beautiful and everything. Folks, we thank you for listening to us. I think the week before the Vampire of Crogland Grange, I think is our 5-year anniversary. It's Creep Street's 5-year anniversary. So we want to say thank you. We love you. Thank you for sticking with us all this time. Here is to 5 years more. We're getting bigger and better. Gage and me have been working on stuff, building stuff out. We've got a lot of fun stuff on the Patreon. We're so happy to have you with us. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
Good night and goodbye.